Hello, and welcome to the Quantum Slumber. I'm genuinely glad you're here tonight, because we're stepping into one of the strangest, most familiar places you'll ever visit. The place you go every night and almost never remember clearly. Dreams. They can feel like tiny movies your brain makes in secret. Sometimes they're beautiful, sometimes they're nonsense. Sometimes they're so emotionally vivid you wake up with your heart racing, even though nothing actually happened. And the truly mysterious part is this. While you're asleep, your brain is not off. In some ways, it's busier than you'd expect, stitching together images, emotions, memories, and impossible little storylines, as if the mind has its own nighttime agenda. So, tonight I want to ask a gentle question that sounds simple, but gets deeper the longer you hold it. What is your brain really doing while you dream? Because dreams aren't just random fireworks in the dark. They seem to follow patterns. They show up in certain kinds of sleep. They borrow pieces from your waking life. They fade in oddly specific ways. And somehow, your mind can build an entire world, complete with feelings, faces, places, and plot twists, while you're completely unconscious. If that doesn't feel like a quiet miracle, I'm not sure what does. And here's the best part. The more science learns about sleep and dreams, the more this nightly experience starts to feel less like a fog and more like a softly lit backstage area where we can glimpse how the mind keeps itself running, healing, and processing, even when you think you're doing nothing at all. Now, before we drift any deeper, if you enjoyed these slow, calming science journeys, I'd be quietly grateful if you tapped the like button, subscribed to the channel, or left a comment below. And I'd love to ask you something simple, the way friends do at the end of the day. Where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it in your corner of the night? All right, take a slow breath, let your shoulders drop, and let's begin our quiet voyage into the dreaming mind. A dream is one of those words we all use, almost casually, like it's obvious what it means. We say, I had the weirdest dream, or I dreamed about an old friend, or I barely slept. My dreams were all over the place. And everyone nods because we've all been there. But if you pause for a moment and try to define a dream clearly, it gets slippery. A dream is not quite a thought and not quite a memory. It isn't the same as imagining something on purpose, the way you might picture a beach or rehearse a conversation in your head. It's more like a private theater that turns on by itself without asking permission, and then quietly rolls a film for an audience of one. At its simplest, a dream is a stream of experiences your mind generates while you sleep. Images, emotions, sensations, little flashes of narrative, and sometimes full-blown scenes with characters, dialogue, and dramatic lighting. Your brain definitely did not need to add. And yet, it does. If your waking life is the world you live in, dreams are the world your brain invents when no one is looking. Sometimes the dream world is gentle. You're walking through a familiar neighborhood at dusk. You smell rain, you feel safe. Everything has that soft, hazy glow, like the edges of reality have been lightly blurred. And sometimes the dream world is completely unhinged. You might find yourself back in high school, except the hallways are shaped like a shopping mall, and your locker is somehow a refrigerator, and everyone is speaking in a language you don't know, but you're still expected to pass a math test you didn't study for. Or you're late for a flight that never boards. Or you open your phone, and every app has turned into a single app called Panic. And in the middle of it all, you're not thinking, this is strange. You're thinking, yes, of course. This is exactly how reality works. That's one of the most fascinating parts. Dreams feel real while they're happening, not because they're accurate or logical or consistent, but because your brain is presenting them with the same confidence it uses to present waking life. In a dream, you can float, and it doesn't seem impossible. You can argue with someone who passed away years ago, and it doesn't feel like a contradiction. You can step into a house that doesn't exist, see a face you've never seen before, and somehow recognize it as familiar. Your mind accepts the rules of the dream world as if they have always been the rules. It's like your brain is saying, very calmly, here's a reality, please take it seriously. And we do. Dreams also have a strange way of mixing the ordinary with the surreal. They borrow pieces of your life, your kitchen, your childhood street, a friend's laugh, a random song you heard earlier, and then rearrange them into something new. You might be in your living room, but it's also a train station. Your best friend might also be your dentist. The sky might look normal, except for the fact that it's full of slow-moving whales. Some dreams come with a clear emotion that's stronger than anything else. You wake up feeling relieved or embarrassed or deeply sad, and the feeling lingers even when the images are gone. The storyline may have already dissolved, like footprints in water, but the mood remains, as if your nervous system is still holding the aftertaste. Other dreams are the opposite. Vivid images, sharp scenes, but emotionally flat. Like watching a strange documentary about someone else's life, except that someone else is still you. And then there are the dreams that are so quick, so fleeting. They barely count as stories at all. A face, a doorway, a sound, a sensation of falling, a brief moment of déjà vu that vanishes before you can even turn toward it. It's no wonder people have argued about dreams for thousands of years. When something is that universal, that intimate, and that strange, we can't help but wonder if it's trying to tell us something. Because dreams feel like they have meaning, even when they clearly don't. You might dream about losing your teeth, or being chased, or suddenly realizing you've forgotten something important. And even if you laugh about it in the morning, there's often a part of you that still asks, quietly, why that? Why now? And sometimes a dream really does feel meaningful. Not in a fortune cookie way, not like it's predicting the future, but meaningful in the way a poem can be meaningful. It doesn't give you a neat answer. It gives you a feeling you can't easily explain. Maybe that's why dreams have been treated like messages for so long. Messages from gods, from spirits, from the universe, from whatever people believed was watching them from beyond the edge of the visible world. And maybe that's also why modern science finds dreams so irresistible. Because even if you don't believe dreams are mystical, the basic fact is still breathtaking. Your brain can generate a world while you're unconscious. It can create characters. It can create motion. It can create dialogue. It can create fear, wonder, desire, and grief, all inside a sealed room with the lights off while your body lies still. That's not just random, that's an ability. Even if the content is messy, even if the plot falls apart, even if your dream turns your coworker into a talking lamp for no reason at all, the machinery behind it is extraordinary. And here's a thought that makes dreams even stranger. You don't really do them. You don't sit down and decide, tonight I'd like to dream about running through an airport made of pudding. Dreams happen to you. They arrive like weather. You might influence them indirectly, through stress, through your day, through what you watch before bed, but you're not the author in the usual sense. You're more like the person sitting in the theater, suddenly realizing the movie is playing, and you don't remember buying a ticket. So when we ask, what is a dream? We're not just asking for a definition. We're asking something deeper. We're asking how the mind behaves when it isn't being managed by daylight. We're asking what consciousness looks like when it's partly unplugged from the outside world and turned inward. We're asking why the brain, of all organs, spends a third of your life putting you into a state where you hallucinate voluntarily, then forget most of it on purpose. And that question leads somewhere interesting, because once you start thinking of dreams as something your brain is actively producing, rather than a strange fog that simply happens, you begin to notice a pattern. Dreams aren't evenly distributed. They show up differently depending on how you're sleeping. They become vivid at certain times, faint at others. They come and go with rhythms your body follows every night, whether you pay attention to them or not. And if dreams are the show, then sleep is the stage. Which raises a quiet, curious question. So, why does the brain bother making these little movies when we're supposed to be resting? For as long as humans have been human, dreams have had a kind of reputation. They don't arrive like ordinary thoughts. They don't feel like ordinary memories. They show up uninvited, pull you into a story, and then vanish at dawn like they were never there. And when something behaves that strangely, when it feels both intimate and otherworldly, people tend to assume it must be important. So, for most of history, dreams weren't treated like mental noise. They were treated like messages. If you could step back into ancient Mesopotamia, you'd find people who believed the dream world was a thin veil, and that what slipped through it mattered. Dreams could be warnings, instructions, prophecies. A king might dream about a flood, or a lion, or a crumbling wall, and wake up convinced the universe had sent him a letter in symbolic ink. In that worldview, the sleeping mind wasn't wandering, it was receiving. In ancient Egypt, this idea became almost practical. Dreams were taken seriously enough that people developed systems around them, guides, interpretations, rituals. If you dreamed of certain animals, certain rivers, certain temples, or strange omens, it wasn't just weird. It was categorized, explained, sorted, sometimes even acted upon. In a way, it was early humanity doing what it always does when faced with mystery, building a framework so the unknown feels a little less wild. And then, as you move forward into ancient Greece, you start to hear a different tone. Not just reverence, but curiosity. Philosophers began asking whether dreams were truly external messages, or whether they might rise from within the dreamer. Aristotle, in particular, offered one of the first, quieter, more grounded suggestions. Dreams could be linked to sensations in the body and the mind's own internal activity. Not a god whispering from the heavens, but the brain and body doing something odd while the lights were out. It was an early shift and a subtle one, but it mattered. Because once you entertain the idea that dreams are generated inside you, the question changes. You stop asking, "Who sent this?" and begin asking, "How did my mind create this?" Still, even with philosophers planting seeds of skepticism, dreams kept their mystical glow for centuries. They were too strange, too vivid, too emotionally charged to be dismissed easily. When you wake from a dream that made you feel grief, or love, or fear so real it clings to your skin, it's hard to believe it was merely random. Then, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, dreams came roaring back into cultural fashion in a different way. Not as divine messages, but as psychological treasure maps. Enter Sigmund Freud, the man who looked at a dream and said, essentially, "Ah, this is you." Freud famously described dreams as a kind of pathway into the unconscious mind. He believed they revealed hidden desires, buried conflicts, forbidden wishes, things the waking self wouldn't admit, even to itself. The dream, in his view, was a disguised message from your own depths. It was dramatic. It was theatrical. It made dreams feel like secret diaries written in code. And it worked, at least in the sense that it captured people's imagination. Suddenly, dreams weren't just strange stories. They were clues. They were evidence. They were the mind speaking in symbolism, slipping truth past the guard at the door. Carl Jung, Freud's former student and eventual rival, took the dream world in another direction. Jung agreed that dreams mattered, but he believed they weren't only personal. He argued that dreams were connected to deeper patterns shared across humanity. Archetypes, recurring images, a kind of collective unconscious. In his view, dreams weren't simply a private confession. They were part of a larger human mythos, a shared language of symbols that shows up across cultures and generations. It's all very grand, very poetic. And if you've ever had a dream that felt oddly mythic, like it was pulling something ancient up from the ocean floor of your mind, you can understand why people found Jung compelling. But here's the moment where modern science gently clears its throat. Because while Freud and Jung were giving dreams enormous meaning, neuroscience was developing new tools, ways to look not just at the story of a dream, but at the organ that makes it. Instead of treating dreams like riddles to decode, researchers began treating them like phenomena to observe. They asked a different kind of question. Not what does it symbolize, but what is the brain doing during this? And that shift changed everything. When scientists started monitoring sleep in laboratories, tracking brain waves, eye movements, muscle tone, they found that sleep wasn't one uniform state. It wasn't a single blank shutdown. It had structure. It had stages. It had patterns that repeated night after night, like a rhythm the brain follows even when you're not paying attention. And most importantly, they began to notice that the kind of dreaming people reported wasn't evenly spread across the night. Some sleep stages were quieter, more abstract, more like faint mental drifting. And other stages, most famously a stage marked by rapid eye movements, were where the mind seemed to bloom into full cinema. In other words, dreaming wasn't just a mystical fog that floated over sleep. It was linked to physiology, to brain activity, to specific internal states you could measure. That doesn't mean dreams have no meaning. It doesn't mean your dreams are pointless. It simply means that before we get carried away by symbolism, it helps to understand the machinery. Because the sleeping brain isn't a silent brain. It's a working brain. A brain cycling through phases, changing its chemistry, shifting its electrical patterns, turning certain networks down and others up, like a city at night, where some neighborhoods go dark while others stay lit. And once you see that, the old question begins to evolve. Dreams are no longer just divine postcards or coded confessions. They're something the brain does reliably as part of the architecture of sleep. Which brings us to a calmer, more modern mystery, one that scientists are still trying to answer. If dreams are rooted in biology, why do they feel so vivid? Why do they feel so real? And why do they seem to arrive most powerfully in certain kinds of sleep, as if the brain has a favorite stage for storytelling? Instead of asking what dreams mean, modern science asks what the brain is doing. If dreams have been treated like messages for most of human history, science has spent the last century asking a calmer question in return. Not what do dreams mean, but when do dreams happen, and what's different in the brain when they do. Because sleep isn't a single flat blank state. It's more like a night landscape with changing weather. There are quieter stretches, deeper valleys, and then, every so often, a bright, strange pocket where the mind becomes theatrical. And one of the biggest discoveries sleep science ever made is that dreaming doesn't show up the same way across the entire night. It clusters, it changes, it has a home base. That home base, most famously, is a sleep stage called REM. REM stands for rapid eye movement, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Under closed eyelids, your eyes flick and dart as if they're tracking something you can't see. It can look, from the outside, like you're watching a tiny, invisible tennis match. Left, right, left, pause. Then a sudden burst of motion again. But the eyes are just the visible clue. Inside the skull, REM sleep is one of the most paradoxical states your brain can enter, because in many ways, your brain becomes more active, not less. In some areas, the activity can look surprisingly similar to waking life. Like the lights in the mind are turned back on, but the doors to the outside world remain closed. It's the brain with the projector running, while the body stays in the audience. This is why REM is often called the stage of vivid dreaming. The big cinematic dreams, the ones with plot twists, dialogue, emotional intensity, bizarre scenery, and the occasional celebrity cameo, tend to show up here. If you've ever had a dream that felt like a full-length film, complete with soundtrack and dramatic tension, there's a good chance your brain was spending time in REM. And what makes REM even stranger is the combination of two things that shouldn't logically coexist. On one hand, the brain is lively. It's generating imagery, emotions, motion, story fragments, and that immersive sense of this is real. On the other hand, the body is kept unusually still, because during REM, your muscles enter a temporary state called atonia, a kind of built-in paralysis. Now, paralysis sounds like a scary word, but in REM sleep, it's actually a safety feature. It's your brain's way of saying, I'm going to simulate running, flying, fighting off a bear, or giving a TED Talk in front of a crowd, but I'd prefer we not do any of that physically. So, your brain plays out the dream, but the body stays parked. It's like the brain puts a little velvet rope around your motor system. You can move inside the dream world with perfect freedom, while your real muscles are politely asked to remain quiet. And most nights, this system works beautifully, without you ever noticing it. REM also tends to arrive in cycles. You don't just enter it once and stay there all night. Instead, your sleep moves in repeating loops, different stages, different depths. Early in the night, REM periods can be shorter. Later, closer to morning, REM periods often get longer. That's one reason people sometimes report more elaborate dreams near wake-up time. The brain has been given a longer stretch to build the set, cast the characters, and let the storyline wander. But here's where it gets interesting. REM isn't the only place dreams happen. For a long time, people assumed dreams were basically a REM-only event. And it's true that REM dreams tend to be the most vivid, story-like, and visually rich. But research has shown that dreaming, or at least dreamlike mental activity, can also occur during non-REM sleep. Non-REM is the other major category of sleep, and it includes several stages that tend to be quieter in terms of dream content. If REM dreams are like movies, non-REM dreams are often more like impressions, a mood, a concept, a drifting thought, sometimes a brief image that feels more like a snapshot than a scene. Non-REM dreams can still be meaningful, and sometimes they can still be emotional, but they often lack that vivid cinematic, how was my brain even capable of rendering this quality. They're more like the mind murmuring to itself, rather than putting on a full production. And the difference matters, because it tells us something subtle about the brain. Dreaming isn't a single on-off switch. It's not just you're dreaming, or you're not dreaming. It's a spectrum, a shifting pattern of mental activity that changes depending on what stage your brain is in, what networks are active, and what chemicals are flowing through the system. REM, in many ways, is where the dream machinery is most fully turned on. Emotion can run stronger, imagery can feel more immersive. The storyline can become bizarre and confident at the same time, confident in the way it presents itself, even when it's completely absurd. Non-REM, by contrast, can feel like the brain doing quieter housekeeping. It might still generate fragments of dream content, but with less sparkle, less narrative glue, less spectacle. And that contrast is one of the reasons dreams have remained such an enduring mystery. Because when you look at the sleeping brain, it becomes clear that dreams aren't simply the mind resting. They're the mind doing something. Sometimes that something looks like memory and emotion being gently reorganized. Sometimes it looks like random signals getting stitched into story. Sometimes it looks like the brain testing out situations with no real-world consequences. And sometimes it looks like the mind simply entertaining itself in the dark. But no matter which explanation you lean toward, the stage matters. REM sleep is a unique neurological environment, an altered state where the brain is active, the senses are mostly disconnected from the outside, and the body is held still. A perfect recipe for immersive inner worlds. And yet, for all the tools we have, for all the sleep labs and brain scans and careful experiments, scientists still don't entirely agree on the deeper why. Yes, we can describe what REM looks like. We can measure eye movements, track brain waves, observe muscle atonia, map activation patterns. We can say fairly confidently that REM is where the most vivid dreaming tends to happen. But the bigger question remains open. Why does the brain bother building these intense inner realities at all? Why should a resting brain need a theater? Why should sleep include stories? And why do those stories show up most powerfully in this particular state? This odd blend of active brain and quiet body. It's one of those questions that feels simple when you first ask it, and then grows larger the longer you sit with it. And if you've ever tried to remember a dream, tried to hold onto it the moment you wake, then you already know another strange truth. Even the most vivid dream can dissolve in seconds, like you were trying to carry mist in your hands. Have you ever noticed how a dream can feel enormous? And then, the moment you wake up, it starts to shrink? Not slowly, like a story fading with age. More like a soap bubble you're trying to carry across a room. You can still feel the mood of it, maybe a tightness in your chest, or a lingering sweetness, or that odd sense that something important just happened, somewhere. But the details, the actual sequence of events, the faces, the places, the strange logic that made perfect sense 5 seconds ago, they slip away with almost comical speed. And that vanishing act is so common that most of us take it as normal. Of course I forgot my dream, we say, the way you might shrug off forgetting a sentence you never wrote down. But from the brain's point of view, it's actually a little strange. Because while you're dreaming, your mind is doing something incredibly elaborate. It's generating images, emotions, movement, dialogue, whole environments, sometimes with more creativity than you can manage on your best day. You'd think a production that big would leave behind a few solid receipts, and yet so often it doesn't. One reason comes down to the brain's memory system, especially a structure called the hippocampus. If you like metaphors, you can think of the hippocampus as the brain's record button. It helps take the stream of experience, what you see, what you feel, what happens next, and press it into a more stable form so it can be stored and retrieved later. In waking life, the hippocampus is usually quite good at this. Not perfect, of course, but good enough that your day tends to hold together as one continuous thread. You can recall what you ate, what you heard, who you talked to, what you meant to do, what you forgot to do, and the moment you realized you forgot. But during certain kinds of sleep, especially REM sleep, where vivid dreams often flourish, the hippocampus doesn't behave the same way. It's not off exactly, it's more like the lights are turned down. The recording system is less eager to stamp a permanent label on what's happening. The brain is still experiencing the dream intensely, but it may not be filing it in the usual way. So you can have this full, immersive inner movie, and then wake up holding only a few loose frames. Another piece of the puzzle is brain chemistry. When you're awake, your brain runs on a certain mix of neurotransmitters that support attention, logic, and memory formation. In REM sleep, that mix shifts. Some of the chemicals that help you form stable, organized memories aren't as available in the same way. And that matters because dreams are often emotional, strange, and fast-moving. Exactly the kinds of experiences that are hard to store, even when your brain is in peak filing mode. It's like trying to write notes during a fireworks show. You look down for half a second, and the whole sky has changed. And it gets even trickier because dreams don't always come in a neat sequence. They can jump. They can splice together scenes from different times in your life. They can introduce a person who somehow looks like your third-grade teacher, speaks like your best friend, and behaves like a stranger at the airport. That kind of mashup is vivid, but it isn't always structured in a way your waking memory system loves. Waking memory likes order. It likes, first this happened, then that happened, and here's why. Dreams often say, we don't really do why here, we do vibes. So even if you try to remember, you're often trying to translate dream logic into waking logic, and the translation process itself can make the dream collapse. You're pinning a butterfly and the wings tear. And still, sometimes a dream does stick. It follows you into the morning like a song you can't quite stop humming. Why? Often it's because of emotion. Dreams that carry strong feelings, fear, awe, grief, joy, embarrassment, tend to leave a deeper imprint. The emotional centers of the brain can be very active during dreaming, and emotion acts like a highlighter. It tells the brain, this matters, pay attention. Even if the details fade, the emotional color can remain. You may not remember what the room looked like, but you remember the sudden dread. You may not remember the exact words, but you remember the comfort. Or you remember that strange, impossible tenderness of someone who isn't even alive anymore, showing up as if they never left. Another reason some dreams stay is timing. If you wake up during or right after a dream, especially a REM dream, you're more likely to catch it before it evaporates. It's like grabbing a postcard the moment it slides under the door. Wait 2 minutes, and it's already drifting under the bed with the dust. That's why people sometimes remember dreams best when they wake in the early morning, or after a brief awakening in the night. The dream is closer to the surface. The brain hasn't fully switched modes yet. The ink is still wet. But if you sleep through the transition, the brain keeps moving. It cycles, it shifts stages, it cleans up, it opens the next file, and the dream that felt so urgent can be quietly overwritten by the simple fact of continuing to sleep. There's also a gentler possibility here, one that feels almost intentional. It may be that many dreams aren't meant to be remembered in detail. Maybe, in some cases, the dream's job is not to deliver a story you can retell at breakfast, but to do its work in the background, to shuffle emotions, to remix memories, to test associations, to loosen knots. Like a night crew in a theater, resetting props and sweeping the stage before the next day begins. You don't see them working. You just wake up to a room that feels slightly different, a little clearer, or at least not quite the same as before. And that's the odd magic of dream memory. You can spend the whole night living through vivid, surreal experiences and wake up with only a few shimmering fragments, a color, a sentence, a face, a feeling. And then, even those fragments begin to thin. Because if you've ever tried to remember a dream in full, you know it's like holding mist. But here's a fun twist. Dreams often borrow more from your waking life than you might expect. If dreams were completely random, you'd expect them to feel like static, little bursts of nonsense with no connection to you at all. But most of the time, that isn't what happens. Most dreams feel weird and oddly familiar. They may not use the right locations or the correct cast of characters, but they borrow your emotional fingerprints. They borrow your unfinished conversations. They borrow the tone of your day, like a song that keeps playing, even after you've turned the radio off. This idea has a name that sounds a little more formal than it feels: the continuity hypothesis. It's the simple thought that dreaming isn't a separate universe. It's your waking life, continued. Not in a literal way. Dreams don't replay your day like a security camera. They do something more mischievous than that. They remix. They take fragments, memories, worries, little sensory details, half-formed plans, and stir them together until the edges blur. And what you get isn't a diary entry. It's closer to a collage. Think about how often a dream will grab something tiny and specific, something you'd never choose as a main character in a story. A weird sign you noticed on the highway, a sentence from a podcast you barely remember, the feeling of trying to send a message and your thumbs refusing to cooperate, a coworker's laugh looping like a sound effect. Your brain keeps those scraps, and later it pulls them out of a pocket like a magician. Ta-da, now it's a whole scene. And the funny part is that dreams don't always care about accuracy. They care about association. So if you spent the evening watching a suspense show, then ate something spicy, then went to bed thinking about an awkward email you forgot to send, your dream may treat those three things like ingredients that belong together. Suddenly you're in a dimly lit office that looks like a movie set. The copier is hissing like a dragon. Your boss is speaking in slow motion. And somewhere in the background, a dramatic soundtrack is playing for absolutely no reason, except that your brain decided it was hilarious. It's easy to laugh at the surface level nonsense, but underneath it, the continuity idea is often very plain. Stress tends to sneak into dreams, so does excitement. So does uncertainty. A big deadline can become a dream about being late to something you can't find. A new relationship can become a dream about arriving at a party and realizing you forgot how to speak. A looming decision can become a dream where every door opens into another hallway and none of the signs agree on what direction you're going. Dreams don't always spell out the problem. They translate it into atmosphere. And then there's the way dreams borrow from your memory library. Not just the fresh stuff from today, but old things you forgot you still had. You can dream about a friend you haven't thought about in 10 years and wake up wondering why your brain dug them up at 3 a.m., like it was casually browsing an antique store. Sometimes it's because something in your day brushed against that old memory. A smell, a song, a phrase, a mood. Sometimes it's just because the brain is constantly linking and relinking information and a forgotten path suddenly lights up. And if that all sounds messy, it is. But it's also a clue. Because the brain is not only storing memories, it's organizing them. It's constantly sorting what matters, what connects, what needs smoothing, what needs strengthening. Dreams may be one of the ways that sorting process becomes visible, like seeing the gears inside a clock for a moment before the face snaps back into place. Now, once you accept that dreams borrow from waking life, the next question almost asks itself. If the brain is remixing your day in the dark, could it also be doing something useful with it? That's where the creativity angle comes in. There's a gentle, almost playful idea in sleep science. Dreaming may be a kind of mental sandbox, a place where your brain can try out combinations it would never dare to try while you're awake and responsible. Because waking life has rules. Waking life has consequences. Waking life has that inner voice that says, that's not how that works. But in dreams, the rule enforcer tends to take the night off. So the brain can connect distant ideas. It can mash together concepts that don't belong together. It can make metaphors without meaning to. It can throw patterns at the wall and see what sticks. Sometimes it sticks in a way that feels like insight. Not always. Often it's just strange art that no one asked for. But every so often, a dream gives you a surprising solution, or a new perspective, or a line of dialogue that feels like it came from somewhere deeper than your usual thoughts. This is why people often say, I woke up with an idea, even if the dream itself is gone. It's like the brain did the work, and then deleted the draft. And we do have famous stories floating around culture, scientists and artists waking up with fragments that later became something real. It's tempting to treat those stories like magical proof, but you don't need the legends to make the point. You can see it in ordinary life. How many times have you gone to bed stuck on something? An essay, a project, a conversation you're replaying, and woken up with a softer grip on it, not necessarily solved, but shifted, less rigid, as if the brain spent the night moving furniture around, and now the room is easier to walk through. That may be one of the quiet gifts of dream creativity. It loosens the mind. It takes what felt fixed and makes it pliable again. And sometimes in that looseness, new connections appear. Of course, the dream doesn't always show up as a wise little teacher. Sometimes it shows up as pure chaos. You dream you're giving a speech and your mouth is full of marshmallows. You dream you're in school again and you can't find your class, and every hallway looks like it was designed by someone who hates geometry. You dream you're trying to call someone and your phone has turned into a waffle. The brain is not above slapstick. But even the silly dreams often have a thread you can recognize when you squint at it. Pressure, anticipation, social worry, excitement, change. The continuity is there. It's just wearing a costume. And that brings us to a calmer, almost backstage question. If dreams borrow from waking life, and if they remix and reshape it, then the real mystery is not just what dreams are. It's what sleep itself is doing to make those dreams possible. Because dreaming doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens inside a larger nightly rhythm. Stages, cycles, shifts in brain activity, like the lighting cues and set changes of a long, quiet play. And to understand why dreams show up the way they do, we need to take one step deeper into sleep itself. Sleep can look, from the outside, like one long, smooth drop into darkness. You close your eyes, time skips, and then morning arrives with a kind of rude confidence. But inside your skull, the night is not a single event. It's a moving landscape, a shifting set of rooms, a slow piece of music with repeating themes, some quiet, some thunderous, some oddly bright, cycling through again and again while you lie perfectly still. That hidden structure is what sleep scientists call sleep architecture, and it's one of the most comforting things to know about sleep because it suggests you are not just passing out. You're following a pattern your brain has been practicing for most of your life. Most nights that pattern runs in cycles. Roughly every 90 minutes, give or take, your brain tends to sweep through a sequence of stages, lighter sleep into deeper sleep, and then into REM, the stage most famous for vivid dreaming, and then it loops back and does it again. 4 cycles is common, 5 is very common, 6 can happen, especially if you sleep a bit longer. It's less like a straight staircase, and more like a slow carousel. You return to familiar places, but you don't stay in each one for the same amount of time. Early in the night, your brain tends to spend longer in the deep, heavy stages, those thick, slow waves that feel like sinking into a warm mattress. Later in the night, REM tends to stretch out, as if the dream studio gets a bigger budget the closer you get to morning. So if you've ever felt like your most vivid dreams happen right before you wake up, that's not your imagination being poetic. That's the pattern. Now, the stages have names that sound like airport terminals: N1, N2, N3, and REM. And yes, that means sleep has at least 4 moods, possibly more, depending on how finely you want to slice it. But for our purposes tonight, these are the big landmarks. It usually begins with N1, the first gentle doorway. N1 is not a dramatic plunge. It's more like drifting toward the surface of a pool, letting yourself float down inch by inch until the world muffles. In N1, you're still pretty easy to wake. Your thoughts may still feel partly yours and partly not. This is the stage where your brain starts to loosen its grip on the outside world. Sounds can slip away. Time begins to distort. Images can pop up in strange little flashes. Faces, fragments, half-built scenes, like someone is turning on a projector and immediately forgetting what movie they meant to play. And this is also the stage where a very common, very human thing happens. That sudden jolt, that kick, that moment where your body decides to perform a tiny magic trick and scare you for no reason. The hypnic jerk. People have described it 1,000 ways. Feeling like you're falling, like you missed a step, like the bed tilted, like your soul tried to exit the building and then remembered it left the oven on. The reality is less mystical and more charming. As your brain begins to relax the muscles, your body sometimes misreads that shift, especially if you're stressed, overtired, or caffeinated. And it throws a small reflex, like a system check. It's not a sign that sleep is failing. It's a sign the machinery is changing gears. And then, usually, the night settles into N2. If N1 is the doorway, N2 is the first real room. It takes up a large portion of a typical night, often the biggest slice of the pie, and it's where your brain starts acting less like a day brain that happens to have its eyes closed, and more like a night brain with its own agenda. In N2, your body temperature drops a bit, your heart rate slows, your muscles relax further, the outside world becomes dimmer, less urgent, and inside the brain, something fascinating shows up on an EEG: sleep spindles and K-complexes. Sleep spindles are brief bursts of rhythmic brain activity, fast little whirlwinds that appear and vanish. If you want a mental image, imagine your brain knitting quietly in the dark. Stitch, stitch, stitch. And then it pauses. K-complexes are larger, slower waves, big, sudden spikes, like a firm shh from the brain to the environment. And if you're in the mood for a silly comparison, spindles and K-complexes sound like indie bands playing a secret show in your head. Sleep spindles, one night only, limited merch. K-complex, the opener that shows up, hits one huge note, and walks off stage without explaining anything. But beneath the jokes, there's a serious possibility here. These patterns may help with things like memory processing, learning, and protecting sleep from disturbance. The brain isn't just resting, it's choosing what to ignore. It's turning down the volume on the world. It's also a stage where dreams can happen, though they often feel different than the cinematic dreams people associate with REM. In N2s, dreams can be more thought-like, more abstract, less like a movie and more like an idea wearing a loose costume, a worry in symbol form, a conversation with missing sentences, a place that feels familiar but doesn't exist on any map. Then comes N3, the deepest non-REM stage, often called slow-wave sleep. If N1 is drifting and N2 is settling, N3 is sinking. This is the stage where the brain waves become slow and powerful, like deep ocean swells. It's harder to wake someone from N3, and if you do, they may feel confused, heavy, not quite assembled yet, like their mind is still loading. N3 is sometimes called deep sleep, and for good reason. It's tied to physical restoration, immune function, tissue repair, and a general sense that the body is doing its overnight maintenance. This is the stage that tends to be richest in the first part of the night. It's as if your brain says, all right, before we do anything fancy, let's do the important repairs. You'll sometimes hear that growth hormone is associated with deep sleep, especially in children and adolescents when it's genuinely relevant to, growing. Adults often find that fact slightly disappointing because it means you can't really sleep your way taller. If that were true, everyone would be 6'4" by Thursday. But the broader point holds. Deep sleep is a kind of biological housekeeping. Not glamorous, not dramatic, just quietly essential. And here too, strange events can happen. Sleepwalking and night terrors tend to be linked to deep non-REM stages. Moments where parts of the brain are awake enough to move, but not awake enough to be fully conscious. It's a reminder that the brain doesn't always switch on and off as a single unit. It's a city at night, with different neighborhoods dimming at different times. Now, after moving through these non-REM stages, the cycle typically swings toward the one that has captured human imagination for centuries. REM sleep, rapid eye movement, the stage where the eyes flicker beneath the lids as if watching something only the dreamer can see. REM is the closest sleep gets to a paradox. In REM, many parts of the brain become highly active, sometimes in ways that resemble wakefulness. Yet, you remain asleep, and your body, rather than moving freely, is largely held in place by muscle atonia, a built-in safety feature that keeps you from acting out whatever the dream you is currently doing. Which is comforting, because dream you has questionable judgment. Dream you is the kind of person who will try to fly off a rooftop because it felt right in the moment. Dream you will also attempt to drive a car made of paper. So REMatonia is, in a very practical sense, your body posting a sign that says, lovely ideas, absolutely not. This is one reason REM is so associated with vivid dreams. The brain is active, the senses are internally generated, and the body is mostly quiet, leaving the mind free to simulate worlds. If N3 is the maintenance crew, REM is the theater. And the theater is not always gentle. Sometimes it's whimsical. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's deeply emotional, sometimes it's unsettling in ways that don't make any sense in daylight. But the most important thing to understand is that REM does not happen once. It returns, over and over. Each 90-minute cycle tends to contain some REM, but the amount changes. Early in the night, REM periods are often shorter. Later, they grow longer, sometimes quite long, so that the last third of the night can contain a substantial amount of REM. This is one of the reasons a morning alarm can feel like a personal betrayal. If you wake someone from deep sleep, they may feel groggy and disoriented, sleep inertia, that thick fog. If you wake someone from REM, you might catch them mid-dream, heart slightly racing, mind full of images, and they might remember a strange story that evaporates within minutes. And because REM grows toward morning, alarms have a habit of interrupting the most elaborate parts of the night's internal cinema. Now, the cycle loops. After REM, the brain tends to drift back toward lighter stages, and then again through the sequence. Not perfectly, not identically, but with enough consistency that researchers can sketch the pattern like a nightly weather report. And that's the core of sleep architecture, a repeating rhythm of stages, shifting emphasis across the night. It's also one of the reasons 8 hours can feel so different from person to person or from night to night. Because sleep quality isn't just about duration. It's about how the cycles unfold, how much deep sleep you get early, how much REM you get later, how often you wake and break the rhythm, how smoothly you transition between stages. You can sleep a long time and still feel as if you didn't. You can sleep a slightly shorter time, but with stable cycles and wake up feeling oddly restored. And this structure helps explain a quiet truth. Your brain is not simply shutting down. It's performing an organized routine, a choreography, a looped song, and when the routine runs smoothly, you may not notice it at all. You just wake up and feel like yourself. But when it gets disrupted by stress, caffeine, irregular timing, late-night screens, noise, anxiety, or simply the chaos of being human, the architecture can wobble. Not necessarily collapse, but wobble. The cycles can fragment. Deep sleep can shrink. REM can get chopped into smaller pieces. And the next day can feel slightly off. Not because you didn't sleep exactly, but because the night didn't get to play out in its usual rhythm. So, as we keep going, hold this image gently in your mind. Sleep as a set of repeating cycles, each one moving through lighter and deeper stages, each one returning to REM like a tide coming in and out. Because once you see sleep that way, a lot of other questions become easier to understand. Why some nights produce vivid dreams and others don't. Why waking up at different times can feel so different. Why stress can make sleep feel thin and broken. And why protecting the rhythm without obsessing over it can make such a difference. Because when that architecture is disrupted, everything else has a tendency to wobble along with it. When people talk about sleep, they often talk about it the way we talk about charging a phone. Plug in, wait a while, wake up at 100%. But your brain doesn't charge in a straight line. It restores itself in cycles. And that's why the architecture matters. Because if you interrupt the pattern over and over, night after night, it isn't just that you slept less. It's that your brain didn't get to finish the particular kinds of work each stage is good at doing. Think of it like a small town that runs on a nightly routine. The roads get patched when traffic is low, the mail gets sorted, the street sweepers come through, the bakery starts early, and somewhere, quietly, the theater turns its lights on and runs a strange midnight show. If the power flickers every 10 minutes, none of that runs smoothly. You might still get some things done, but the rhythm gets choppy, the order gets scrambled, and the next day feels oddly unfinished. This is why you can sleep for a decent number of hours and still wake up feeling as if your body negotiated a bad deal. Not because you're broken, not because you failed at sleep, but because the night was fragmented, and the deeper stretches, especially deep sleep and longer REM periods, got trimmed into little pieces. When your deep sleep gets clipped, people often describe a particular kind of fatigue. Heavy, foggy, physical, like you're awake technically, but the lights are on a dimmer switch. When REM gets chopped up, some people notice a different flavor, moodier, more irritable, less emotionally steady. Others feel a little more thin-skinned, as if the world is just slightly louder than it needs to be. And memory can get weird too. Not the big dramatic kind, but the small everyday kind. Names slipping away, sentences half-built, that feeling of walking into a room and forgetting why you came in, and then deciding the room is haunted and leaving. Sleep touches almost everything. Attention, appetite, patience, the immune system, even pain sensitivity. It's not magic, it's biology doing what biology does best. Quietly influencing your entire day without asking your permission. So, what disrupts the architecture? Usually it's not one villain in a cape, it's a committee. Sometimes it's stress, which has a talent for showing up exactly when you'd like it to take the night off. Stress doesn't just make it harder to fall asleep, it can make sleep lighter once you get there, like your nervous system is keeping one ear open, just in case the world tries something. Sometimes it's caffeine, especially later in the day. Caffeine doesn't always prevent sleep entirely. It can simply change the shape of it, making sleep a little shallower, making awakenings a little more frequent, shaving down the deeper stages like a lawnmower you didn't ask for. Sometimes it's blue light and stimulation, which is really two things at once. The light itself, and the fact that what you're looking at is designed to keep your brain engaged. A bright screen at midnight isn't just a lamp. It's also a tiny slot machine made of information. Sometimes it's an irregular schedule, sleeping in late, staying up late, shifting bedtime by hours from one day to the next. Your brain can adapt, but it prefers consistency. It likes knowing when night is supposed to happen, the way your stomach likes knowing when lunch tends to arrive. And sometimes, it's the simple stuff. A room that's too warm, a random noise, a pet doing midnight gymnastics, or your own thoughts deciding that 2:17 a.m. is the perfect time to review every awkward moment you've ever experienced. The tricky thing is that you can't always control these factors. Life doesn't always offer a neat, quiet bedtime. So, the goal isn't perfection. The goal is gentleness and trend lines. A little respect for rhythm. Because even small improvements, dimming the lights a bit earlier, pulling caffeine a little earlier, Keeping wake time somewhat steady can help your brain keep its cycles intact. Not every night will be beautiful, but the brain loves a pattern it can recognize. And when the pattern holds, something subtle happens. You stop noticing sleep so much. You stop negotiating with it. You simply wake up and feel more like yourself. Which brings us to the next lingering mystery. If the brain is willing to protect this architecture so carefully, if it returns again and again to that bright, paradoxical stage of REM, then it raises an old question that refuses to go away. Why does the mind bother making dreams at all? Some questions feel like they should have a simple answer, the way a light switch has a simple job. You flip it, the room changes, end of story. Dreams are not like that. Dreams are more like a weird little town that only appears after midnight. Streets rearranging themselves, familiar faces showing up in unfamiliar places. Your emotions acting like they have their own schedule. And the truly strange part is this. Your brain is spending energy to produce all of it. It isn't doing nothing. It's making something. So the obvious question is why? Why would a brain that's trying to rest also decide to screen a private movie festival? Sometimes funny, sometimes heartbreaking, sometimes so absurd you wake up thinking, how did I accept that as normal? If you ask scientists, you don't get one answer. You get a small crowd of answers, each one holding a flashlight, each one illuminating a different corner of the same dark room. One of the most popular ideas is that dreaming is tied to memory. Not the sentimental kind, but the filing cabinet kind. All day long, your brain is taking in data, words, faces, smells, mistakes, tiny wins, random bits of conversation you didn't even mean to remember. If you tried to store it all cleanly, immediately, you'd clog up your mental inbox. So, the brain may do what any overwhelmed system does. It sorts things later. Some researchers compare sleep to a kind of save function, moving information from short-term holding areas into longer-term storage, strengthening certain connections, weakening others. And dreaming, in this picture, might be what it feels like when that sorting process becomes conscious enough to notice. Not every dream would be a message. Sometimes it's just the filing system running. A memory of your 4th grade classroom bumps into the sound of a podcast you heard at lunch. A face from yesterday gets pasted onto the personality of someone from 10 years ago. Your brain isn't trying to tell you that your boss is secretly your 7th grade math teacher. It's simply linking, organizing, stitching. If that sounds unromantic, don't worry. Your brain has a flair for drama, even when it's doing paperwork. Another closely related idea is that dreams help with learning and skill building. We tend to think of learning as something we do while awake, studying, practicing, repeating. But your brain keeps working after you close your eyes. In the background, it can replay patterns, reinforce them, smooth out the rough edges. Sometimes you can feel this in a small way. You struggle with something during the day, an idea, a task, a piece of music, a new routine, and then the next day it's a little easier. It's not because you became smarter overnight like a cartoon character. It's because your brain may have spent the night strengthening certain networks. And if dreaming is the brain's stage lighting, then those rehearsals might show up as imagery. Maybe not literal. I dreamed I was doing algebra, more like symbolic movement, running, searching, building, repeating. Which brings us to a different theory, one that focuses less on memory files and more on the heart. Dreaming might be an emotional process. If you've ever noticed that dreams can feel intensely emotional, fear, longing, embarrassment, joy that arrives out of nowhere, it's tempting to think your sleeping brain is doing some kind of emotional housekeeping. There's a reason people say, "I feel weird today," after a rough night of dreams, even if nothing objectively happened. Your brain spent hours generating emotional weather. One hypothesis is that dreams help you process emotional experiences, especially ones that were too sharp to fully digest during the day. While you sleep, the brain can revisit certain themes with a slightly different chemical environment, one where the alarm bells aren't blaring quite as loudly. It may be a safer space to let feelings move through without being actively in the situation. Not as therapy in the cozy, intentional sense. more like the brain doing what it always does, attempting to adapt. Sometimes that adaptation looks gentle. A dream takes a stressful moment and changes the ending, or it turns a specific worry into something vague and symbolic, as if your mind is saying, here's the shape of what you're feeling. And sometimes it looks messy. Dreams can stir emotions up without resolving them. They can be awkward, intense, confusing. Emotional processing doesn't always come with a neat conclusion. The brain is not a screenplay writer. It's a living system trying to regulate itself. Then there's a theory that has a slightly more wild animal flavor. The idea that dreams are a kind of simulation. Imagine you're a creature in a world that occasionally contains danger. You survive by recognizing patterns quickly. That sound means trouble. That situation means you should leave. That face means you should be cautious. If you had a safe internal space to rehearse responses, it might give you an advantage. This is the basis of the threat simulation idea. Dreams as a nightly training program, letting you practice dealing with conflict, chase scenarios, mistakes, social tension, all without actually risking your body. And when you look at common dream themes, being late, being unprepared, being chased, trying to speak and not being heard, you can see why people find this plausible. Dreams often toss you into mild crisis, and watch what you do. Of course, your brain is not literally trying to prepare you for an actual bear. Most of us are not facing bears. We are facing emails, but the underlying systems are old. The brain doesn't always update its software to match modern life. A humiliating meeting can trigger the same uh-oh circuits as something much more primal. And in a dream, those circuits may get a turn to run scenarios, like a flight simulator that never stops. Now, before we get too impressed by how purposeful all of this sounds, there's another perspective that's almost the opposite. It says, maybe dreams don't have a grand purpose. Maybe dreaming is what you get when the brain is active and the mind tries to make sense of it. This is often called activation synthesis. And it's one of the most humbling theories because it treats the dream like a story your brain tells after the fact. During sleep, especially REM, different brain regions are firing in certain patterns. Signals rise up. Fragments of memory activate. Sensory areas spark even though no outside input is coming in. And your waking mind, the part that loves meaning and narrative, does what it always does. It synthesizes. It takes random sparks and turns them into a scene. It takes emotional tone and turns it into a plot. It takes a loose association. Dog, hallway, childhood, embarrassment, and turns it into a full production with lighting, costumes, and at least one character who behaves in ways you would never allow while awake. In this view, dreaming isn't a message being sent. It's a story being generated because the brain cannot tolerate chaos without interpretation. Even in sleep, the mind is a meaning machine. And honestly, if you've ever woken up and thought, that dream made zero sense, this theory has a certain appeal. It gives you permission to stop hunting for hidden symbols in every flying toaster. Sometimes the toaster is just there. But even if dreams are partly the brain's improvisation, that doesn't mean they're useless. Improvisation can still do work. Randomness can still lead to learning. Noise can still help a system find new solutions. Which brings us to a quieter, clever idea. Dreams might help the brain with creativity and problem solving. When you're awake, your thinking can become rigid. You follow familiar pathways. You keep returning to the same assumptions. You're a responsible adult, and responsible adults love consistency. In dreams, the responsible adult tends to clock out. Connections loosen. The brain wanders. It pairs things that don't belong together. And occasionally, that weird pairing creates something new, an insight, a fresh angle, a reframe you wouldn't have made in daylight. This doesn't mean you should demand that your dreams solve your problems like a magical consultant. Dreaming is not a guaranteed idea factory. Most dreams are more like abstract art than useful instruction, but the flexibility itself could be valuable. If your brain is a network, dreams might be the time it allows unusual routes to open. Paths that are normally blocked by logic, habit, or social rules. And sometimes, just sometimes, those paths lead somewhere interesting. There's also a developmental angle that's easy to forget until you spend time around kids. Children tend to have a lot of dream activity, and they also spend their waking lives learning at a remarkable rate. Some researchers point out that dreaming may be connected to brain development and learning, especially early in life, when the brain is building models of the world, testing social patterns, practicing emotions, learning what self feels like in different contexts. A child's dream might not look meaningful in an adult way. It might be simple, chaotic, repetitive, but it could still be a form of internal training, helping the brain wire itself more efficiently. And even in adults, learning never fully stops. We're always adapting. We're always updating our internal map, sometimes slowly, sometimes urgently. So here we are, standing in a room full of theories, and none of them have kicked the others out. That's the honest state of the science. Dreams likely aren't one thing. They might be a multi-tool. Sometimes dreaming looks like memory processing, sorting, strengthening, pruning. Sometimes it looks like emotional regulation, softening sharp experiences, integrating feelings, letting the nervous system practice. Sometimes it looks like simulation, running rehearsals for social friction and danger-shaped stress. Sometimes it looks like synthesis, your brain generating narrative out of activation because it simply can't help itself. Sometimes it looks like creative wandering, new connections forming in the loosened rules of sleep. And the same dream could contain several of these at once. A dream can be nonsense and still be useful. It can be beautiful and still be random. It can be emotionally intense and still be a byproduct of the brain's chemistry. That's what makes dreaming so fascinating. It sits right at the edge of purpose and accident. A private theater where the brain is both the actor and the audience, both the stagehand and the critic. And if you listen closely, underneath all the surreal imagery, you can almost hear the deeper question humming. What is the brain actually doing, moment to moment, when it builds a dream? Because to understand why dreams happen, it helps to meet the cast of characters inside your skull that make them possible. So, dreams may be doing many jobs at once, but how does the brain actually stage the show? If you could peek behind the curtain of a dream, you might expect to find one obvious director calling the shots. Instead, you'd find a small, busy crew, each brain region doing its own job, at its own volume, sometimes cooperating, sometimes stepping on each other's lines. And when the lights go out and sleep begins, the balance of that crew changes in a way that feels almost theatrical. Because the strange truth is this: the dreaming brain is not off. It's active, it's humming, it's improvising. And it does that improvising with a very particular cast. Let's start with the part of your brain that usually acts like the responsible adult in the room. The prefrontal cortex, especially the frontmost regions, helps you do things like plan, reason, check yourself, and notice when something doesn't add up. It's the mental voice that says, "Wait, that doesn't make sense," or "Maybe don't text your ex," or "Let's not try to cook spaghetti in the bathtub." In many dreaming states, that voice becomes quieter. Not completely silent, but softer. The quality control department clocks out early. And once that happens, dreams get permission to be beautifully unreasonable. In a dream, you can be running late for a final exam in a school you haven't attended in 20 years, and no part of you stops the scene and says, "Excuse me, what is happening?" You accept the logic of the moment, because the brain region that normally questions the logic is running on a dimmer switch. That's why dreams often feel like a world with its own internal rules. They can be emotional, vivid, urgent, yet structurally odd. They can switch locations without warning. People can change identities mid-sentence. A hallway can turn into an ocean, and you might just keep walking like that's a normal life choice. So, if the prefrontal cortex is quieter, who's louder? One big candidate is the amygdala, a small, almond-shaped region deeply involved in emotion, especially emotions that are urgent, intense, or survival-flavored. Fear, alarm, excitement, threat detection, social embarrassment, that tight feeling of something is wrong. Now, it's not that every dream is scary. Plenty are funny, sweet, romantic, or just plain weird. But even in neutral dreams, emotion can feel amplified. The colors feel brighter. The mood has a stronger grip. A small moment can feel enormous. That's the amygdala's signature. It's one reason a dream can be about something silly, like a talking dog giving you legal advice, yet still leave you with a lingering sense of anxiety or warmth or nostalgia, as if your body believes something important happened. Your emotional brain is leaning forward in its seat. And when emotion leans forward, your dream story often follows. This helps explain why nightmares feel so sticky. If the amygdala is active and the prefrontal cortex is less likely to step in and say, "This isn't real," the emotional wave can roll through with fewer breaks. The dream doesn't have the same breaks you'd use while awake. It's like watching a suspense movie with the remote control missing. Then there's the hippocampus, which you can think of as a kind of memory librarian. Not the entire library. Memory is distributed all over the brain. But the hippocampus plays a key role in forming new memories and helping you place experiences in context, time, place, sequence. It's part of what helps you answer questions like, "Did that happen today or last week?" Or, "Was that person in my office or did I just dream them?" In dreams, the hippocampus doesn't always behave like a strict librarian. Sometimes it supplies material. Sometimes it lets things float around without proper labels. Sometimes it hands the dream a stack of images, with the sticky notes missing. That's why dreams can borrow from real life, but remix it. You might see your childhood street, but it's attached to your adult job. You might talk to someone who looks like your friend, but sounds like your parent. You might feel the emotional tone of a real conversation, but the dialogue becomes completely fictional. The hippocampus is offering content, but not necessarily organizing it into a neat timeline. And when you wake up, that's often why dreams are so hard to explain. You're trying to translate something that didn't have firm timestamps in the first place. Now, let's talk about the brain region that makes dreams feel so visual, so cinematic, so strangely detailed, even when your eyes are closed. That would be the occipital lobe, especially visual processing areas in the back of the brain. When you're awake, this region is busy interpreting light, coming through your eyes, edges, shapes, motion, faces, depth. But in dreams, there's no outside input. So what is it doing? It's running the projector without a camera. The dream is, in a sense, a hallucination you participate in, created internally, generated from memory, fragments, emotion, and imagination, then rendered into something that your conscious mind can see. That's why dreams can have textures, lighting, movement, color, perspective. Your brain is building a world model and letting you walk around inside it. It's also why a dream can feel almost more vivid than waking life. Not because it's better, but because the brain can cheat. It can skip the messy steps of reality. It can create a scene that feels crisp because it isn't limited by physics or by the real constraints of eyes and light. Your occipital lobe can paint with pure suggestion. And when you combine that with the emotional intensity from the amygdala, you get that classic dream sensation, a vivid inner movie that feels important, even when it doesn't make sense on paper. Now, if this were a stage production, we've covered 4 major roles: the prefrontal cortex, the skeptical editor, turning down the volume; the amygdala, the emotional amplifier, leaning forward; the hippocampus, the memory librarian, handing out props; the occipital lobe, the projection booth, lighting up the scene. But there's another thing worth mentioning. The way these systems interact can explain a lot about the feel of dreams. For example, why are dreams so often socially awkward? Why do they so often involve being exposed, unprepared, late, misunderstood? Because social emotions, shame, fear of rejection, anxiety about status, are the kind of emotions the brain treats as important. In a deeply social species, being out of place can register as a threat. The amygdala doesn't care whether the threat is a tiger or an embarrassing moment. Urgency is urgency. And the prefrontal cortex, the part that would normally soothe you with logic, is less likely to cut in and say, "It's fine, you're safe, you're in bed. So, the dream plays the uncomfortable scene like it matters. Or consider why dreams can feel like they're happening to you, rather than something you're choosing. That's partly because the regions that support deliberate control and self-monitoring can be reduced. In waking life, you're constantly updating. This is me. This is my body. This is my plan. In dreams, that self-management is looser. The storyline can drag you along like a river because the systems that steer the boat are less active, while the systems that generate imagery and feeling are more active. It isn't that you have no agency in dreams, it's that the dream has more agency over you. And that's why a lucid dream feels so different when it happens, because the responsible adult circuits step back into the room and suddenly you can say, oh, this is a dream. But most nights, you don't get that memo. Most nights, the brain's cast is performing without the full supervision of the waking mind. And it's doing so with surprising efficiency, like a theater troupe that knows exactly how to build a stage in the dark. Now here's the twist. Even with all of these roles described, we still haven't explained what starts the dream, or what gives it that particular REM flavor, the sensation of a show beginning, imagery blooming, the mind snapping into story mode. Because somewhere behind the scenes, there may be a spark, a signal, a wave that helps lift the curtain. And once you notice it, you realize dreaming isn't just a metaphorical theater. It has stage machinery. And then, there's a strange little spark that may help roll the first frames of the dream. There's a moment, sometimes you can almost feel it, when sleep stops being a gentle drift and becomes something more theatrical. Not loud, not dramatic in the daytime sense, just structured, like the house lights dimming in a small old movie theater, and the screen brightening before you've even decided what you want to watch. A lot of that curtain-rising feeling seems to come from deep in the brain, in places that don't care about your to-do list, your inbox, or whether you remember to move the laundry. These are older circuits, quiet, reliable machinery, built to run the basic rhythms of being alive. And during REM sleep, some of that machinery sends a very peculiar signal. It's often described as PGO waves, short for pontogeniculo-occipital waves. The name sounds like something you'd order at a sci-fi diner at 2 in the morning, but it's actually just a geography lesson. Ponto points to the pons, a part of the brainstem that helps regulate sleep states. Ageniculo points to the lateral geniculate nucleus, a relay station in the thalamus that's heavily involved in visual processing. And occipital points to the occipital lobe, the part of the brain that helps generate the images you see, whether your eyes are open or not. So you can imagine these waves like a little ripple of activity that starts low, travels upward through a relay, and taps the visual system on the shoulder. Not with words, more like a nudge, a flicker, a soft internal roll camera. Scientists have been curious about what these waves mean for a long time. We don't fully agree on every detail because the brain loves to keep its best secrets, but PGO waves are strongly linked with REM sleep, especially the vivid, image-heavy, cinematic flavor of dreaming that so many people recognize. If you like metaphors, you can think of them as a kind of opening act, the orchestra tuning its instruments, the first few frames of film threading through a projector. They might help set the stage for dream imagery, or help the brain shift into a mode where visual scenes can bloom quickly, even with no outside world coming in through the eyes. And that's the weird beauty of it. The brain is able to build a world without windows. It can generate motion, faces, landscapes, impossible architecture, staircases that don't obey gravity, cities that don't appear on maps, oceans in the middle of a hallway, because the visual system is being driven from the inside. So, during REM, your brain can be busy painting a movie, while your body stays almost completely still. Which brings us to one of the most important and most misunderstood features of REM sleep: REM atonia. Atonia simply means a loss of muscle tone. And in REM sleep, it's not a bug, it's a safety feature. Because think about what dreaming can be like. Even the gentle dreams can involve movement. Walking, running, reaching, dancing, falling, climbing, swimming, talking with your hands like you're telling an exciting story to someone who lives inside a cloud. If your body carried out every dream action, your bedroom would become a stunt set. So the brain, again, largely through brainstem circuits, does something very clever. It keeps the motor system from turning imagination into motion. The motor cortex can still be active. The dream can still feel like you're doing things. But the final go signal to most muscles gets blocked or heavily dampened. It's as if the brain hangs a little sign on the body that says, "Do not disturb, dream in progress." This is why in typical REM sleep, you're not physically acting out the chase scene you're dreaming. You're not sprinting across the mattress. You're not leaping heroically off the nightstand. You're safe, and so is anyone else nearby, including the innocent pillow that has done nothing wrong. Now, it's worth saying gently, REM-atonia isn't always absolute. Tiny movements can still happen. Little twitches, small facial expressions, occasional murmurs. That can be completely normal. The sleeping brain isn't a perfectly sealed machine. It's more like a dimly lit city at night, with a few streetlights flickering. But the broad pattern is still there. During REM, the body is mostly held quiet while the mind runs. And that quiet body has an important side effect. It may actually help dreams feel more immersive. When your muscles aren't moving and your senses aren't busy responding to the outside world, the brain can devote more of its attention to the inner scene. There's less competition from reality, fewer interruptions from where your arm is or what your foot just bumped into. In a way, REM-atonia helps the dream world feel uninterrupted, like a movie that plays without someone pausing it every 30 seconds to ask if you want snacks. But what happens when that "do not disturb" sign doesn't work the way it usually does? That's where we briefly, gently talk about something called REM sleep behavior disorder, or RBD. In RBD, the normal REM-atonia is reduced or absent. The brain is still dreaming, but the body is not fully locked the way it typically is. That can lead to a person moving during REM sleep in ways that are more pronounced than the usual tiny twitches. Often, it can look like the body is responding to dream content. Now, very important, we can mention this without turning it into something scary. Most people will never experience RBD, and many sleep-related movements have other explanations: stress, certain medications, other sleep conditions, or just the natural messiness of the human nervous system. Also, the point of bringing up RBD in this story isn't to worry anyone. It's to show how precise the dreaming machinery is, and how, when one part of it changes, the whole experience can change. It's like realizing the theater isn't magical in a vague way. It's magical in a mechanical way. There are gears and levers. If you ever suspect something like RBD, especially if movements during sleep are frequent or concerning, the kindest, most practical advice is simply, it's worth mentioning to a healthcare professional. Sleep medicine exists for a reason, and there are ways to help. You don't have to diagnose yourself in the dark at 3 in the morning, like you're starring in a medical drama called WebMD, After Midnight. Just know this: the brain's default design is protective. REM-atonia is a quiet guardian. It's the reason dreams can be wild without making your body live them out. And that guard, most nights, does its job beautifully. So, stepping back, we have this intriguing trio working together. PGO waves, nudging the brain toward imagery and internal cinema. REM-atonia, gently holding the body still so the dream can run safely. And RBD, a reminder of what happens when that safety lock doesn't fully engage, showing that dreaming isn't just a poetic mystery, but a real biological state with real switches. All of it points to the same larger idea. Dreaming isn't random noise. It's an organized mode the brain enters, one where the mind can roam while the body rests. And sometimes, when the show is running so smoothly, something even stranger happens. The dreamer notices the stage lights. The dreamer recognizes the set. The dreamer realizes, this is a dream. Now, sometimes the dreamer becomes aware, inside the dream. There's a particular kind of wonder that can happen in the middle of the night, quiet, private, almost mischievous, when the dream suddenly feels a little too clear. Not clearer in the sense of more realistic exactly. Clearer in the sense that some small, calm part of you leans in and whispers, "Wait a second, this is a dream." That moment is what people usually mean by lucid dreaming, becoming aware that you're dreaming while the dream is still unfolding. And sometimes, though not always, that awareness comes with a little steering wheel. Not a full set of controls like a video game controller, but more like a gentle nudge. You might choose to look around, to ask a question, to walk through a door you would have avoided. Or you might simply sit down inside the dream and let it play, comforted by the knowledge that it can't truly harm you. It's a strange state because it doesn't feel like regular waking life, and it doesn't feel like a fully automatic dream either. It's a hybrid, a kind of overlap between sleeping and waking. Your body is still asleep, your brain is still in that REM-style movie mode, but a small light comes on upstairs. The light that says, "I'm here, I'm noticing." And the really interesting thing is that this isn't just a poetic idea. Sleep researchers have found clever ways to show that lucid dreaming can be real in a measurable sense. Not because someone claims it happened, but because they can send a simple signal from inside the dream. Here's the trick. During REM sleep, most muscles are kept quiet, but the eyes can still move. So in lab settings, lucid dreamers have been asked to do something very simple once they realize they're dreaming, like moving their eyes left, right in a pre-agreed pattern. It's a tiny hello from the dream world to the waking world, recorded on the outside while the dream continues on the inside. It's a bit like being underwater and tapping on the glass. Not to escape, just to say yes, something is happening in here. Now, lucid dreaming isn't constant. Not everyone experiences it, and even for people who do, it can be rare, an occasional visitor rather than a nightly roommate. And even when you become lucid, the dream can slip away quickly, like soap bubbles that don't like being stared at too hard. But people have tried to increase the odds, and over time a handful of approaches have become popular, some backed by research, some more personal tradition than hard proof, and most best treated with a light touch. One gentle method is often called mild, which stands for mnemonic induction of lucid dreams. The idea is less like forcing something to happen and more like planting a small reminder in your mind before sleep. You set an intention, calmly, without pressure, that if you dream tonight, you'll notice it. It can be as simple as repeating a line like, "Next time I'm dreaming, I'll recognize it," or imagining yourself inside a dream and spotting something that gives it away. The key word here is gentle, not a vow carved in stone, more like leaving a sticky note on the fridge. Your brain might ignore it, but sometimes, when the dream gets weird enough, it remembers. Another approach people talk about is reality checking, little habits during the day meant to carry into dreams. The logic is, if you practice asking, "Am I dreaming?" in waking life, you might ask it in the dream too. And in dreams, reality is famously bad at passing basic inspections. You might try reading a line of text twice and seeing if it stays the same, or glancing at a clock, looking away and checking again, or noticing something simple. Do the lights behave normally? Does gravity feel normal? Are you currently having a polite conversation with a dolphin in a supermarket aisle? The funny thing is, these checks aren't magical. They're more like training your attention, teaching your mind to pause and notice instead of drifting through the experience on autopilot. And even if they never trigger lucidity, they can still create a small mindful moment in the day, which isn't exactly a loss. Then there's a more intense method you'll hear about called wild, wake-initiated lucid dreaming. This is the one that tends to sound the most dramatic because it involves trying to keep awareness as you fall asleep, slipping directly into a dream without fully losing consciousness. Some people describe it like stepping from one room to another without turning off the lights. But this method can be tricky, and for many people, it's not worth chasing too hard because trying to hold on to awareness can keep you from sleeping naturally. It can also lead to experiences that feel odd or unsettling, like noticing that your body is asleep while your mind is still awake, which can blur into the territory of sleep paralysis sensations for some people. So, in a bedtime science story like ours, it's best to treat wild as a curiosity, something that can happen, but not something you need to pursue, especially if it makes your sleep feel like a performance review. Lucid dreaming at its best isn't about winning sleep. It's about noticing a door that sometimes opens. Now, why would anyone want that door to open in the first place? For some people, it's simply the wonder of it, the same reason you might want to look through a telescope, even if you can't bring the stars any closer. There's something deeply human about realizing you're inside a world your brain created, and looking around with calm amazement. For others, it's creativity. Lucid dreams can feel like a private studio where ideas show up unannounced. Images, story fragments, emotions, strange combinations that don't obey the usual rules. You can't always control what appears, but you can sometimes explore it with a little more intention. And then there's one of the most practical reasons people mention: nightmares. Some individuals use lucid awareness as a way to soften recurring bad dreams, not by battling monsters in a heroic way, but by changing the relationship to what's happening. If you can realize, this is a dream, the nightmare sometimes loses its sharp edge. The fear may still be there, but it can become more workable, less absolute, like thunder heard from indoors instead of out in the open. Sometimes the simplest move is just turning toward the fear and saying, "Okay, I see you, but you're not driving tonight." That said, lucid dreaming isn't a guaranteed tool, and it isn't a replacement for professional help if nightmares are frequent, intense, or connected to trauma. It's just one of the many ways the mind tries to comfort itself, one of the many little lanterns it can hold up in the dark. And here's the important caution to keep the whole topic honest and healthy. Lucid dreaming can be fascinating, but sleep is still the priority. If trying to lucid dream turns into staying up late, obsessing, interrupting your rest, or making bedtime feel like a project, then the cost is too high. The dreaming brain needs steady sleep more than it needs fancy tricks. It's also normal for some people to feel a little weird after lucid dreams, especially if they're vivid. Not dangerous, just strange. Like waking from a movie you didn't know you were directing. If that happens, it helps to keep it in perspective. It's your brain doing brain things. Creative, powerful, occasionally odd. The healthiest approach is often the simplest. Stay curious, stay gentle, and let sleep be what it wants to be. Because lucid dreams are not the main meal. They're a rare dessert that sometimes appears without warning. And if it doesn't show up, you still got what you actually came for: rest. But every once in a while, it does show up. You're walking through a place that feels familiar and impossible at the same time. The colors are a little too perfect. The storyline is already halfway off the rails. And then something clicks. Quietly, softly, like a switch you didn't know you had. And you realize you're inside your own dreaming mind. And once that door opens, even for a moment, it's hard not to wonder what else the sleeping brain can do, especially on the nights when the dream turns darker, heavier, and less playful. And speaking of nightmares, not every dream is marshmallows and whimsy. Some nights, dreams feel like soft lantern light, odd little stories with rounded edges, the kind your mind can smile at as it drifts. And then there are the other nights, the ones where the dream sharpens into something heavier, the ones that don't feel like a playful movie at all, but like your brain accidentally tuned into a channel you never asked for. In everyday conversation, we tend to call all of that a bad dream. But sleep science actually separates a few different experiences that can look similar from the outside, while being quite different under the hood. The three big ones people mix together are nightmares, night terrors, and sleep paralysis, and each one lives in a slightly different neighborhood of sleep. Let's start with nightmares, because they're the most familiar. A nightmare is a dream, usually a vivid one, that carries strong fear, stress, or discomfort. The details can vary wildly. Some nightmares are dramatic and cinematic, like your brain decided to produce a thriller on a budget of pure emotion. Others are quieter, but still unsettling, an endless sense of being late, being lost, being watched, being unprepared, being unable to speak when you need to. What makes nightmares distinct isn't the plot. It's the fact that they're typically tied to REM sleep, the same stage that gives us the most story-like, image-rich dreams. And because nightmares are often REM-based, you usually wake up with some memory of them, sometimes a lot of memory. You might open your eyes with your heart tapping fast, and you can still see the last scene lingering in your mind like after images. And then, frustratingly, the body may calm down faster than the feelings do. Your room is quiet, your blankets are normal, your ceiling is the same ceiling it always was. But your brain is still holding the emotional color of what just happened. That lingering intensity is one reason nightmares can be so memorable. Fear and strong emotion have a way of leaving fingerprints. For most people, nightmares are occasional. A stressful week, a scary movie too late, a big life change, illness, irregular sleep. Any of these can make dreams rougher. But when nightmares happen frequently and start disrupting sleep or creating dread about going to bed, it can move into what clinicians call nightmare disorder. That doesn't mean anything is wrong with you as a person. It just means the pattern has become heavy enough to deserve attention and support. Sometimes nightmares also show up in a recurring loop. Similar themes, similar emotional beats, especially after stressful or traumatic experiences. The mind is trying to process something. It's just doing it in the most dramatic theater it owns. Now, night terrors are a different creature. Despite the name, night terrors are not simply really bad nightmares. They tend to happen during deep non-REM sleep, often earlier in the night when the brain is in a slow wave rhythm. In that deep territory, dreaming is usually not as story-like, so night terrors are less about a frightening narrative and more about a sudden storm of arousal. From the outside, a night terror can look intense. Someone may sit up, look distressed, breathe fast, maybe cry out. But here's the key difference. During a night terror, the person is often not fully awake, even if their eyes are open. It's like the brain pulled the emergency alarm while the conscious mind is still offline. Because it's happening in deep non-REM sleep, there's often little or no dream recall afterward. The next morning, the person might remember nothing at all, or only a vague sense of unease. That can be confusing for families, especially with children, because it looks so dramatic in the moment, and then it's gone, like it never happened. And yes, night terrors are more common in kids, and many children outgrow them. Their sleep systems are still developing, and deep sleep is abundant in childhood. The good news is that night terrors, while scary to witness, are usually not a sign that a child is psychologically broken or haunted. It's often a sleep state mismatch, like the brain briefly trying to run awake alarm mode while still locked in deep sleep. For adults, night terrors are less common, but they can happen, sometimes linked to sleep deprivation, irregular schedules, stress, alcohol, certain medications, or other sleep disorders. If they're frequent, that's where it becomes worth discussing with a clinician, not because it's mysterious or shameful, but because better sleep stability can help the brain stop hitting that alarm button. Now for the third experience, one that is especially good at making people feel spooked, even though it's surprisingly common and usually harmless: sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis is what it sounds like. You wake up, at least partly, but your body still feels switched off. You might be aware of your room, aware that you want to move, but movement won't cooperate right away. This can last seconds, sometimes longer, and it can feel deeply unsettling because it's a reminder that your body and your awareness don't always come online at the exact same moment. Sleep paralysis is often described as a REM glitch, and that's a helpful way to think about it. During REM sleep, your brain uses a protective feature called atonia, a kind of muscle quieting that helps keep you from physically acting out dreams. In sleep paralysis, the mind wakes up while that atonia is still fading out, so you get the awareness of waking, with the body still stuck in the REM safety mode for a brief overlap. And because the brain is in that borderland, half dreaming, half awake, it can sometimes produce weird sensory experiences. Not because anything supernatural is happening, but because the dream machinery hasn't fully powered down yet. The brain is excellent at filling in gaps, especially when it's sleepy and especially when it's anxious. The most important thing to know is this: sleep paralysis is not dangerous, even though it can feel scary. It ends, the system resets, the body catches up. If someone experiences it, the gentlest approach is reassurance and patience. Some people find it helps to focus on slow breathing or to try a tiny movement, like a fingertip or a toe, rather than trying to move the whole body at once. Small signals can help the brain flip the switch back to full waking mode. And if it happens repeatedly, that's not a moral failing or a sign you're bad at sleeping. It can be associated with sleep deprivation, irregular schedules, stress, and in some cases, conditions like narcolepsy. So again, if it becomes frequent or distressing, it's worth mentioning to a professional who understands sleep. So, nightmares are REM dreams with strong emotional weight. Night terrors are deep non-REM surges, more like an alarm without a story. Sleep paralysis is a brief overlap, waking awareness while the REM safety lock is still disengaging. 3 different mechanisms, 3 different flavors of the night got weird. Now, there's one more piece here that's genuinely hopeful, especially for nightmares. A technique you'll often hear about in sleep psychology is called imagery rehearsal therapy, or IRT. And the idea is surprisingly simple. If the brain is replaying a frightening script at night, you practice rewriting that script while you're awake. Not by pretending it never happened, not by forcing yourself to just get over it, but by giving your mind a new version to practice, one that shifts the ending, changes the tone, or restores a sense of safety and control. In a basic form, IRT involves choosing a nightmare you remember, then creating an alternate ending or alternate storyline that feels less distressing. Sometimes the change is dramatic, sometimes it's small. The goal isn't to craft a masterpiece. The goal is to teach your brain, here is another path this dream can take. Then, during the day, briefly, gently, you rehearse that rewritten version in your imagination. Like a musician practicing a new melody so the old one isn't the only tune the fingers know. And over time, for many people, that practice can reduce nightmare frequency or intensity. It's as if the brain, given options, starts selecting the less painful route more often. If nightmares are severe, frequent, or tied to trauma, IRT is best done with guidance from a qualified clinician. But the existence of the method is comforting all by itself, because it reminds us that the dreaming mind is not a villain. It's a system that can learn. And that brings us to a quiet truth underneath all 3 of these experiences. Dreams don't just happen in a vacuum. They're connected to stress, emotion, sleep schedules, and the invisible weight of daily life. Which means the next question isn't only what happened in that dream. It's also, very gently, what has your waking mind been carrying lately? Sometimes the best clue about your dreams isn't hidden inside the dream at all. It's sitting with you the next morning. You wake up and the room is the same. Same ceiling, same quiet air, same ordinary light. But your inner weather has shifted. Maybe you feel oddly tender, as if your mind spent the night sorting old letters. Maybe you feel edgy for no clear reason, like your brain ran a marathon while you were supposedly resting. Or maybe you feel fine, but a single scene from a dream follows you around all day like a song you didn't choose. That's where the link between dreaming and mental health becomes interesting. Not in a fortune teller kind of way, but in a very human, very practical way. Dreams don't diagnose you. They don't prove anything about your soul, but they often echo what your nervous system has been carrying. When life is calm, dreams can feel like a quirky late-night improv show. Strange, playful, oddly creative. When life is stressful, dreams can get louder. Not because you're broken, because your brain is doing what brains do, reacting to pressure, trying to metabolize emotion, trying to keep you functional. Stress and anxiety, in particular, have a recognizable signature in dreams. An anxious dream often isn't about monsters. It's about situations. Being late, being unprepared, losing your phone, missing a flight, showing up to an exam you didn't study for, trying to speak and finding your voice won't work the way it should. The storyline is different for everyone, but the emotional core is remarkably consistent. Urgency, embarrassment, helplessness, a sense of being evaluated. That makes sense when you consider what anxiety is, at its core. Anxiety is your brain's threat detection system running a little too hot. It's the smoke alarm that chirps at burnt toast. And when that system is hot during the day, deadlines, uncertainty, social pressure, money worries, health worries, your dreams can start feeling like nightly rehearsals for everything that might go wrong. Even mild anxiety can color dreams. You might binge a tense show, scroll too long, have a difficult conversation, fall asleep with your mind still online. And your dream will obediently scoop up those emotional leftovers and remix them into something cinematic. And then there's depression, which can shift dreams in a different direction. Some people with depression report fewer remembered dreams, as if the nights are more blank. Others report dreams that feel heavy, slower, grayer, more repetitive, with themes of loss, distance, regret, or being unable to reach something. Again, this isn't a universal rule, and it certainly isn't a diagnosis, but it matches what depression can do to waking life. It can dull reward, flatten color, change motivation, and alter how the brain tags experiences as meaningful. Dreams tend to borrow the brain's emotional palette. If the palette is muted in the day, it can be muted at night too. Now, one of the most important and most delicate connections here involves trauma and PTSD. Many people who have lived through trauma describe dreams that become stuck in loops, recurring nightmares, repeating scenes, or themes that feel less like imagination and more like the mind being pulled back into a moment it never got to safely file away. In some theories, dreaming, especially in REM, helps the brain process emotional memories, taking the sharp edge off. It's like the mind is trying to restore a memory in a way that doesn't set off the alarm system every time it's touched. With PTSD, that de-sting process may not work smoothly. The memory stays electrically charged. The dream returns not as a gentle story, but as a flare. And it's worth saying softly, clearly. If that's someone's experience, it doesn't mean they're weak. It doesn't mean they're failing at sleep. It means the nervous system is still doing its best to protect them, even if the method is exhausting. That's also why certain therapies aimed at nightmares, like imagery rehearsal, can help some people. You're not arguing with the mind, you're offering it an alternate route, a different ending, a new pattern. A nervous system that learns can also relearn. But dreams aren't only shaped by feelings, they're shaped by chemistry too. Which brings us to medications, especially medications that affect the brain's neurotransmitters. A lot of people notice that when they start, stop, or adjust certain medications, their dream life changes. Some report vivid dreams, some report fewer dreams, some report a strange emotional tone, some report that dreams feel more fragmented or more intense for a while. This is not your imagination. It's a reminder that dreaming is not a mystical broadcast. It's a biological process. For example, medications that influence serotonin, like many SSRIs, can affect sleep architecture, including REM. Some people experience REM suppression, especially early on, meaning they may spend less time in REM or have REM shifted around. And because REM is a stage closely tied to vivid dreaming, changes in REM can change how dreams feel, how often they're remembered, and how emotionally intense they seem. Then there's a curious phenomenon called REM rebound. If REM has been suppressed by certain medications, by alcohol, by sleep deprivation, when that suppression is lifted, the brain sometimes catches up by spending more time in REM for a period. And more REM can mean more vivid dreams, more dream recall, and sometimes more intense emotional dreaming. People will describe it like someone turned the dream brightness up 2 notches overnight. That rebound is a great example of how the sleeping brain tries to keep balance. It has preferences, it has rhythms, it doesn't always get what it wants on a given night, so it compensates when it can. Other medications can influence dreaming too. Some can fragment sleep, some can deepen it, some can change how easily you wake up during the night, which also changes dream recall. Sometimes the dream didn't get stronger. You simply woke at the perfect moment to remember it. And this is where a gentle, practical note matters. If someone's dreams become disturbing, intense, or disruptive after a medication change, it's worth discussing with a qualified clinician. Not because dreams are a crisis by themselves, but because sleep is part of health, and people deserve to feel steady at night. But let's zoom out for a moment, because there's a comforting perspective here. Even when dreams get strange, especially when dreams get strange, the brain is usually not trying to harm you. It's trying to regulate you. Think of dreams as the mind's maintenance language. Sometimes that language is poetic and beautiful. Sometimes it's nonsense. Sometimes it's the emotional equivalent of your computer running updates at 3 a.m. and making the fan spin louder than you'd like. And sometimes, yes, the content is so weird that it's hard to take seriously. You wake up and you're thinking, why was I being chased through an airport by a flying broccoli? That was somehow also my high school principal. And in that moment, it can help to remember, the dreaming brain is not a perfect storyteller. It's a pattern maker. It grabs scraps, faces, places, worries, jokes, songs, old memories, then stitches them together into something that feels meaningful because it feels emotional. It's the same reason you can hear a random sound in the night and your half-awake brain turns it into a full sentence. The brain hates empty space. It fills gaps. It makes sense, even when sense isn't required. So if your dreams have been louder lately, it may be a sign that your days have been louder too. More stress, more uncertainty, more internal pressure, more screen time, more irregular sleep, more stimulation, more change, or simply more emotional load, good or bad, than usual. And if your dreams have felt darker, it may be a sign that your nervous system is tired, or that your emotional world has been heavy, or that your brain is trying to process something that hasn't found a calm place to land yet. None of this is destiny. None of this is a label. It's just the mind doing what it has always done, translating life into images while you sleep. And there's one more gentle thought to hold on to. If dreams are a kind of brain language, if they're the nervous system speaking in symbols and sensations, then it's not a language that belongs only to humans. It's older than us, wider than us, and we're not the only ones who speak it. If dreaming is a kind of brain language, it would be a little surprising if humans were the only ones who spoke it. Because when you've lived with an animal, really lived with one day after day, you've probably seen the small, mysterious signs. A dog asleep on the rug, paws twitching as if it's running somewhere soft and invisible. A quiet little woof that escapes without waking them. A cat curled like a comma, whiskers flicking, as if it's tasting a scent only the night can deliver. We tend to laugh, and it's a good kind of laugh, warm and gentle. Oh, we say, they're dreaming. And in many cases, science would nod along. The simplest way to approach this is to separate two questions. The first is, do animals have the sleep state that, in humans, is strongly linked to vivid dreaming? The second is, do animals have dream content? Little inner stories, images, feelings, anything like what we experience. The first question is easier to answer. Many mammals, and birds as well, show a sleep stage that resembles human REM sleep, the period when the brain becomes more active, the eyes may move, and the body is normally kept still by a kind of built-in off switch for muscles. This is the same general stage where humans often report their most vivid cinematic dreams. So, when you see a dog twitching in sleep, you're not being silly when you wonder. Their body is doing something that looks very much like the REM pattern we associate with dreaming. The second question, what their dreams feel like from the inside, is harder. We can't ask a dog to describe last night's plot twist. We can't hand a cat a microphone and say, tell us about the dream sequence. But we can look for clues. And one of the most fascinating clues comes from experiments with animals that learn tasks while awake, like navigating a maze. In studies with rats, researchers have recorded patterns of neural activity when the rats run through a maze. Later, during sleep, those patterns can reappear, as if the brain is replaying parts of the experience. Not as a perfect movie, but as a kind of rehearsal, like the mind quietly practicing the route again when the lights are out. It's an eerie, beautiful thought. A tiny animal sleeps in a small nest of bedding, and in the dark theater behind its eyes, the day returns in faint electrical echoes. Birds offer another remarkable hint. Songbirds learn and refine their songs, and sleep seems to play a role in that learning. Their brains show activity during sleep that resembles patterns from singing practice. It's as if the brain is polishing a skill after hours, tightening the timing, smoothing the edges, strengthening what matters. That doesn't prove a bird dreams about singing to an audience of squirrels in tiny tuxedos, but it does suggest something important. Sleep in other animals isn't just off time, it's active time, it's processing time. And once you accept that, dreaming, whatever form it takes, starts to seem less like a human oddity and more like a feature of brains that need to learn, adapt, and emotionally regulate. Now, about those familiar, cozy household animals, dogs and cats. With pets, we mostly observe the outward signs, the twitching paws, the little kicks, the soft mouth movements, the tail flicks. Those movements can happen because the brain is sending motor signals, even while the body is mostly kept still. That kept still part matters, by the way. In humans, REM sleep often comes with muscle atonia, a protective mechanism that prevents us from physically acting out our dreams. Something similar seems to happen in many mammals. It's the brain's way of letting the inner world run freely without turning the bedroom into a stunt scene. And when that mechanism fails in humans, it can lead to REM behavior disorder, something we spoke about earlier in a very gentle way. In animals, researchers have explored similar ideas by looking at what happens when the normal REM off switch is disrupted. Again, we're not trying to turn this into anything alarming, just noticing the elegance of the system. Brains across species appear to value the ability to simulate without danger, to run the story without running into the wall. So, do animals dream? The cautious scientific answer is, many animals show sleep states and brain activity patterns that strongly suggest something dreamlike is happening, especially in mammals and birds. The bolder, more human answer is, it would be strange if they didn't. But here's the sweetest part of this topic, and it has less to do with lab equipment and more to do with empathy. Even if an animal's dream is not a narrative the way ours can be, even if it's not a story with scenes and dialogue, it may still be a feeling space, a place where the brain revisits what mattered: food, safety, companionship, play, fear, comfort. A dog might not dream in words, but it may dream in scents, in the memory of a park, in the rhythm of footsteps, in the warm certainty that someone they love is nearby. A cat might not dream a plot, but it may dream a pounce, a shadow, a familiar windowsill, the soft hum of a home that belongs to them. And if that's true, then dreaming becomes something quietly universal, a private inward drift that happens wherever a brain is complex enough to carry a life, which is a comforting thought, really. When your own dreams feel strange or tender or impossible to describe, you're not alone in the night. Across houses and streets and fields, other creatures are sleeping too, little lungs rising and falling, little brains flickering with quiet activity. In their own way, they may be voyaging as well. For most of human history, dreams were private in the purest sense, little stories told behind the curtain of your own skull, witnessed by no one else. You could describe them the next morning, of course, but description is always a translation. A dream can feel enormous while it's happening, and then shrink into a few awkward sentences over coffee. So it's no surprise that modern science, with all its blinking machines and careful graphs, has been tempted by a question that sounds like science fiction and philosophy at the same time. Could we ever record a dream? The first thing to know is that most of the tools we use to study sleep were not designed to see the images in your mind. They were designed to tell us what state the brain is in. Take the classic one, EEG, the electroencephalogram. It listens to the brain's electrical rhythms from the outside, like placing microphones on the roof of a stadium and trying to guess what game is being played inside. EEG is wonderfully good at identifying sleep stages. It can tell you when the brain is drifting into lighter sleep, when it sinks into slower waves, when it pops into REM with that lively, irregular activity. But EEG doesn't hand you the dream itself. It won't print out a picture of the hallway you keep walking through, or the impossible ocean you keep trying to cross. It doesn't translate your dream into a movie file. It gives you the weather report of the brain, not the plot. To get closer to the content, researchers have looked to tools that can map activity deeper in the brain, like fMRI, which tracks blood flow changes related to neural activity. fMRI is slower than EEG, and it's not exactly cozy. You don't drift off easily while listening to the soothing sounds of a machine that resembles a futuristic washing machine. But it can show patterns across many brain regions at once. And that's where things start to get interesting. In a few research lines, scientists have paired brain imaging with machine learning and asked a careful, limited question. Not, show us the dream in HD, but can we guess broad categories of what someone is seeing or thinking about? And with training, meaning the algorithm learns patterns from many examples, researchers have had some success at decoding general content. The difference between faces and houses, for example, or whether a person is looking at certain types of scenes. It's not mind reading in the dramatic movie trailer sense. It's more like recognizing the silhouette of a landscape through fog. Because even when these systems work, the result isn't a crisp photograph of a dream. It's closer to an impression, a probability, a rough sketch that says, something like this? Maybe. And that's the honest feeling of it, frosted glass. You can tell someone is in the room. You can make out movement. You might even guess whether they're waving or dancing, but you don't get the fine details, the eye color, the tiny expressions, the secret symbols on the wallpaper. Some of the most intriguing work doesn't even try to reconstruct dreams during sleep directly. Instead, it uses a clever detour. Have someone view images while awake, record the brain patterns, then use that dictionary to help interpret later patterns. Other approaches ask people to report what they dreamed right after waking, then match those reports to the brain activity that came before. Even then, the reconstruction you sometimes see in headlines is best understood as a blurry, simplified echo, like a watercolor painted from memory, not a screenshot. Still, the door is cracked open, not wide, not enough to make dreams public property, but enough to remind us that dreams are not magical in the sense of being untouchable. They're biological events, private, yes, but happening inside matter, inside cells, inside a brain that leaves traces. And that possibility brings a strange new thought into the room. If we can someday peek at dream content, even in broad strokes, what does that mean for privacy? For consent? For the simple right to have an inner life that belongs only to you? We're not there yet, not even close. But the fact that we can ask the question with real data and get even fuzzy, partial answers means the future is going to feel a little unfamiliar. Because once you can glimpse even the rough outline of a dream, the next steps start to look quietly sci-fi. There's something a little humbling about realizing that, for thousands of years, dreams were the most private place a human could go, a sealed room. A lantern-lit theater that only one person could ever sit inside. And now, very slowly, very carefully, science is learning how to tap on the door without kicking it in. Not to steal the mystery, not to turn sleep into a product, but to understand what's possible and what should probably remain untouched. Because the future of dreaming may not arrive with a dramatic mind-reading machine. It will more likely arrive the way most real futures do, quietly, in small pieces. A new sensor that gets a little better at timing, a new algorithm that recognizes a pattern, a new study that says we can nudge the odds just a little. One of the most fascinating ideas in that category is something called targeted dream incubation. It sounds like a grand phrase, like you're planting a seed in the mind and watching it bloom into a perfect dream. but in practice it's gentler than that. It's more like leaving a postcard on the kitchen table before you go to bed, something your sleeping brain might glance at while it's wandering through the house at night. Researchers have explored simple cues, a sound, a word, a scent, delivered at the right time, in the right sleep stage, with the lightest touch. A classic example is smell, because scents can slip into the brain without fully waking it. Imagine a faint rose-like scent introduced during sleep, soft enough that it doesn't pull you up to the surface, but present enough to be noticed by the dreaming system. In some studies, people report more pleasant dream content when that kind of gentle cue is used. Or picture a quiet audio cue, a single word like tree, whispered by a device only when your brain seems to be entering a dream-rich phase. The next morning, you might remember a forest, or wooden stairs, or a strange house made of branches. Not guaranteed, not scripted, just a nudge. And that's the important word, because your dreams are not a playlist. They're not a menu. They're more like weather patterns. You can create conditions that make rain more likely, but you can't order a thunderstorm like delivery. Still, the idea that we can influence dream themes at all, without waking the dreamer, opens a new door in sleep science. Then come the wearables. We're already surrounded by devices that track sleep, watches that estimate sleep stages, rings that listen to pulse and temperature, headbands that try to read brain rhythms from the forehead. And as these tools improve, the temptation will be obvious. If we can detect when someone is likely dreaming, could we time a cue more precisely? A gentle sound at the edge of REM, a calming tone when a nightmare pattern is suspected, a soft prompt that encourages a certain emotional direction, comfort, safety, curiosity. Some prototypes and early experiments aim at exactly that. And the honest scientific posture here is promising, interesting, and still young. Sleep staging from consumer devices is often an estimate, not a perfect map. Brains vary, nights vary. A cue that helps one person may annoy another. And the line between helpful and disruptive can be thinner than we think. But even with those limits, you can see where the path leads. Toward a world where sleep is no longer a total blackout, where it becomes something we can measure, interpret, maybe even gently guide. And once you allow guidance, the imagination runs a little farther. You can almost picture dreamlike virtual environments, soft, responsive worlds built not to overstimulate, but to soothe. A kind of bedtime landscape that listens to you the way a lullaby listens, adjusting, dimming, slowing, matching your nervous system as you drift. Not to trap you inside a headset all night, just to create a calmer runway for sleep. Then perhaps to pair with cues that continue after you've crossed into dreaming. Again, the future isn't a cinematic leap. It's a series of quiet possibilities. And that's where the ethical questions begin to breathe. Because dreams are not just entertainment. They are one of the last spaces where you can be completely unobserved. A private language spoken in images and emotion, where the mind tries on fears and hopes without witnesses. So if technology ever gets good at peeking in, even a little, then mental privacy becomes more than a philosophical idea. It becomes a practical, urgent boundary. Who owns your dream data? Who gets to store it? Who gets to interpret it? And what happens if interpretation becomes a kind of power? Because even if a device can only decode broad categories, faces, places, movement, emotion, that is still a fingerprint of the inner life. A shadow of what you were experiencing when you thought you were alone. That's why so many researchers and ethicists talk about neurorights now. Ideas like cognitive liberty, mental privacy, and autonomy. Not because the nightmare future is guaranteed, but because the sacredness of the mind deserves protection before it becomes convenient to ignore. If dreams are the mind's wild garden, then we should walk through it like guests, not owners. Careful with our footsteps, respectful of what doesn't belong to us. And maybe, in the end, it's worth remembering something simple. Your brain has been dreaming without instruction for your entire life. Night after night, it has been doing its quiet work, sorting, healing, rehearsing, playing, grieving, inventing, forgetting. You don't have to solve it tonight. You don't have to figure out your dreams like a puzzle. You can let them be what they are, the mind's poetry, written in a language older than words. So, wherever you are, let your shoulders soften a little more. Let the day loosen its grip. And if your dreams come, strange, sweet, tangled, luminous, let them pass through like clouds across a moonlit sky. If you enjoyed this slow journey, a like and a subscription helps this quiet little channel find more listeners who need it. And I'd genuinely love to know, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there? Good night.